is part of a lecture Plant Breeding in a Modern World in the scope of the course Applied Genetics at the University of Ostrava. What are the targets of plant breeding? Which plant traits can be improved by breeding? 1. Increase yield. This can be achieved by breeding for plants that produce bigger fruit or more seeds. Domesticated corn as we know it has hundreds of seeds on its cob thanks to mass selection of its ancestor teosinte that had only a single row of seeds per pod. Sometimes increasing the yield requires selecting for a different trait. In rice, if you increase the number of seeds in a rice stalk, it will become too heavy for the fragile stems of the tall variety of rice to carry. Their stems will bend under the weight of the stalk, and the grains will be drowned in the water of the rice field. Plant breeders can, however, produce rice plants that have heavy stalks and short, sturdy stems that carry the load of these stalks, thus dramatically increasing the yield of rice. 2. Increase nutritious value. What happens when you take the gene for beta-carotene that gives daffodils their lovely yellow color, and you use genetic engineering techniques to introduce it in rice, which is lacking beta-carotene? You get golden rice, a yellow golden colored variety of rice rich in beta-carotene. Beta-carotene is a precursor of vitamin A, a nutrient that is often deficient in the diet of populations in poor countries. 3. Herbicide and insecticide resistance. A rather infamous example of herbicide-resistant crops are the Roundup Ready crops produced by Monsanto. Roundup Ready crops have been genetically engineered to be resistant to a large-spectrum herbicide commercialized under the name Roundup. When a field that contains Roundup Ready crops is invaded by weeds, it can be sprayed by the herbicide. The active component of Roundup, glyphosate, is preventing the weeds from producing some essential proteins, but it does not affect the protein production of the Roundup Ready crops. So after herbicide treatment, Roundup Ready crops will be left intact, where all weeds in the field will die out. This technology is appealing because it does not require manual weeding of the field. However, very quickly after its introduction, it resulted in the emergence of herbicide-resistant weeds in the nature. 4. Pathogen resistance. Same as all other living organisms, plants are attacked by various pathogens. These can be fungi, such as those causing blight, or the penicillium rots that you may have seen on forgotten citrus fruit. They can be viruses, such as the one causing the leaf curls, bacteria, and all sorts of insects, including the bollworms. Traditionally, these pathogens are eliminated by applying some kind of external treatment. In the case of the bollworm, plants are sprayed with an insecticide containing a toxin called Bt. Thanks to plant breeding, we now have crops that produce their own insecticide and do not need insecticide treatments. Bt is a molecule that is synthesized by Bacillus thuringiensis, a soil bacterium which accumulates the toxin in crystals in its cytoplasm. Using genetic engineering techniques, the Bt gene can be introduced in plants so they can produce their own toxin and thus protect themselves from bollworms. The results of this can be staggering. This bollworm-infested cotton field has Bt crops on your left and non-Bt crops on your right. Without insecticide treatment, only Bt crops are capable of flowering, and the non-Bt crops have all their flowers eaten up by the bollworm. This pathogen resistance, similarly to herbicide resistance, can be also problematic as it causes the emergence of Bt-resistant bollworms. Moreover, such techniques cannot be used in feeding crops as Bt is also toxic to humans and other animals. 5. Stress tolerance. With the ongoing climate change, it will become more and more important for the crops to be resistant to radical environmental variation, such as prolonged droughts and floods or increased salinity levels. Plant breeders can produce stress-resistant crops, such as this rice variety with a very complicated name, which is highly resistant to salinity levels that are otherwise too high for conventional rice varieties to sustain. 6. Facilitate agriculture. Many plant traits which are very useful for non-cultivated plants and weeds are undesired in crops. Farmers have been eliminating these traits via plant breeding since the beginning of agriculture. For instance, seed dispersal is a very useful characteristic for weeds, whose aim is to spread their offspring as much and as far as possible, and for this have evolved some really impressive dispersal characteristics, such as flying seeds of the daffodils and the exploding seeds of the touch-me-not plants. Other dispersal techniques involve fruits with hooks that can grasp the fur of animals and then be dispersed by zoochory. Ancestors of modern-day crops were also able of dispersing their seeds, such as the aforementioned teosinte. But this is not something that an agriculture would like. Imagine the seeds falling off of a corn cob before you're able to harvest it. That would be so much farming work for nothing. Agriculturists and plant breeders have unconsciously, and nowadays consciously as well, selected and bred plants that retain their seeds as much as possible so that there is no unnecessary loss of the yield. Another trait that facilitates agriculture is the synchronized flowering time. You have probably noticed that big fields of canola and other crops tend to flower all at the same time. In this way, all plants in the field and of different fields will be pollinated at the same moment and then mature their fruits synchronously, so the whole field can be harvested at once. Alternatively, for other species, asynchronous flowering can be more advantageous. Take, for example, the tomatoes, where flowering and fruiting occur throughout the season. In this way, we have a long-lasting tomato seasons, which is rather convenient as ripe tomatoes are very difficult to store. Dormancy is yet another characteristic of non-cultivated crops that is very useful for their survival and dispersal. Seeds usually need to be exposed to a set of favorable conditions in order to germinate, such as sufficient sunlight, water levels, soil pH, and temperature. However, most weedy seeds also need to undergo some specialized conditions without which they cannot germinate, even if all the essential conditions are fulfilled. Seeds that need such conditions are called dormant. Dormancy is a way for the seeds to assure that they will germinate in optimal conditions for the growth of the plant. This can be, for instance, passing through the digestive tract of an animal, which will fragilize the hard external envelope of the seed, or being exposed to cold temperatures. In this way, the seeds make sure that they will not germinate too early in the season and then risk of dying out because of spring frost. In warm and wet climates, some seeds need to be exposed to high temperatures, often occurring during fires, after which the surrounding vegetation is destroyed and there is less competition for light and nutrients with it. Dormancy is, however, not a desired characteristic for crop seeds. If an agriculture has to wait for all their seeds to pass through the digestive tract of cattle before being able to plant them, that would be highly inconvenient. Therefore, most cultivated crops are non-dormant. This has been achieved through many generations of mass selection for the seeds that are the easiest to germinate. 7. Improve aesthetics. Although it might not seem as important as the other traits, we often breed plants to make them prettier. This is obviously done with flowers, in which plant breeding has given some stunning results, such as the wild rose being transformed into these voluptuous domesticated roses, and the vast variety of plant colors, shapes, and perfumes as well. But breeding for aesthetics is also done in other crops such as tomatoes. Having in mind all the traits plant breeding can improve, let's see what are some of the challenges that plant breeders are facing today. One such challenge is to counteract the effects of climate change. The global temperatures of the planet have been increasing for the past few decades and will continue doing so in the future, with more and less optimistic predictions about their trajectories. Climate change will not affect temperature only. Precipitation levels will also change, resulting in more frequent and more devastating floods in some places marked in blue on the map. and longer and more intense droughts in other places. And finally, the species distribution will also change. Quite a few species have already gone extinct, and many more will continue doing so in the years to come because of global change. But other species will become more widespread and often invasive. This map shows that in most countries, at least one new invasive species will be introduced by the end of this century, with some countries having over 500 new invasive species. Invasive species are often problematic for cultivated crops, as they're pathogens or some kind of harmful weeds that compete for resources with the crops. Plant breeders can address these issues by improving different traits, such as increased stress tolerance, increased pathogen resistance, or facilitated agriculture that allows for easier and more efficient crop farming. In addition to the intensified global change, human population is also growing at a rapid pace, and at this rate, the expected population size will be over 10 billion by the end of the century. All these people will need food, but also clothes and often other materials made from plants. So in addition to making sure that crops will be able to survive global climate change, plant breeders need to make sure that the crops will produce sufficient food of good quality required to feed the human population.